My name is Ethan Brown, and I'm 35 years old. Every person has some kind of strength or talent. As a kid, I wasn't particularly great at sports, music, or art. I wasn't the fun, outgoing type who made lots of friends either. But for some reason, I was naturally good at studying. Because of that, I gradually started spending more time focusing on academics, which I found to be my strong suit. During middle and high school, I was the classic bookworm, a dull student with excellent grades. Thanks to my efforts, I graduated from one of the top high schools in the state and went on to attend a prestigious university in New York. I thought I would enjoy a vibrant college life, making friends and experiencing exciting things. But that didn't happen. While the students around me had fun, they were on point, doing tests and presentations and earning college credits. On the other hand, I attended all my classes and worked diligently to earn credits. In other words, I couldn't master the art of cutting corners or gaming the system. As a result, I remained an unremarkable student throughout my college life. I couldn't help but think how dull I was as a person. Still, my dedication paid off, and I graduated within 4 years. Shortly after, I landed a job as a sales representative at a leading pharmaceutical company. I seemed to be on a smooth path forward. In the pharmaceutical industry, being a medical representative (MR) is known for being a well-paying and highly sought-after role. Every day started early with visits to pharmaceutical wholesalers, followed by hospital rounds in my designated area. Some days stretched late into the night, with me returning home past midnight. Monthly sales quotas were set impossibly high, regardless of how much effort you put in.
Ethan, the month is almost over, and you're only at 70% of your target for the key drug. Do you plan to hit the quota or not? If you don't, your performance review will be affected.
Every Monday morning, my manager singled me out during team meetings, calling attention to my subpar performance. In the MR field, people will use any means necessary to meet their quotas. In the past, this led to widespread practices of excessive entertaining of doctors, which eventually became prohibited after public scrutiny. I joined the industry hoping to engage in fair sales practices, but I learned the harsh truth over 6 years. There were loopholes, and shady tactics were everywhere. Of course, I've been doing my best to meet the quotas ever since I joined the company. However, the quotas I barely managed to achieve last year were casually increased and handed to me as if it were the norm. The overly honest approach I took might have made me an easy target for MR from competitor companies handling rival products. Gradually, they took over the market share, and the usage rate of my company's drugs in my assigned territory began to decline. To my manager, my performance and style were frustratingly inadequate. His criticism during meetings grew harsher, shifting from constructive advice to personal attacks and outright insults. After 6 years, my mind and body were completely worn out. The overwhelming quotas and managerial pressure eventually led to me collapsing during a client visit at a clinic. It was due to exhaustion.
He must be a performance stunt to gain sympathy from the doctors.
Finally, he's learning to use some tactics.
To outsiders, it may sound unbelievable, but these conversations among rival MR reflect the industry's win-at-all-costs mentality. After that incident, I never fully recovered. Unable to return to work, I left the company. I decided to return to my parents' home to recover. My parents live in a remote area, deep in the countryside. Their house that could be described as isolated. As a child, I hated the countryside and couldn't wait to leave. That drive pushed me to excel in school and aim for life in the city. I never imagined it'd return, my dreams unfulfilled. All the effort I put into my studies back then, what was it all for? When I arrived home, my parents welcomed me warmly. When I told them I wanted to go to college in New York, and later when I decided to stay there for work, they had said nothing. They must have known how much I hated the countryside and how desperate I was to leave. Deep down, they probably had mixed feelings about their son returning after failing in the city. At home, my family grew vegetables and worked in forestry, so I started helping out with those. At that point, I thought of it as a recovery period until I could return to working in the city. In other words, I initially prioritized my career and planned to get back on track as quickly as possible. Should I return to the pharmaceutical industry? If so, should I go back to my former company or try another one? Maybe I could leverage my MR experience for a sales role in a different industry. For the first 6 months, those were the kinds of thoughts running through my mind. But gradually, I began to find purpose and satisfaction in working with nature. The work I had once resented started to heal my weary mind and body, worn down by years of chasing sales quotas. Perhaps this was the kind of work I had been seeking all along. When I harvested the vegetables I had planted, fertilized, and weeded myself, or when I climbed a tree before cutting it down and gazed out over the expansive natural landscape and our family fields, I felt a sense of fulfillment I had never experienced in my corporate job. In the city, I spent my days waiting for doctors until late at night, doing whatever it took to push my company's products. Every day demanded that I use any means necessary to achieve my quotas. Compared to that, how majestic nature is, and how meaningful the vegetables harvested from it are. Nature doesn't respond to shortcuts or tricks. It demands patience, sincerity, and consistent effort. That country life might have been the kind of work that truly suited me best all along. Before I knew it, 7 years had passed since I left the company and returned to my parents' home. One day, on my way back from delivering vegetables to town, I saw an unfamiliar car and a woman standing beside it. It was rare to see someone visit such a remote area, and her perfectly tailored suit gave her the air of a stylish career woman. Seeing someone like her on an unpaved country road created an odd and almost comical contrast. Not that it was her fault. I decided to approach her. "Is everything okay?" She explained that she was heading to a famous restaurant nearby, which had been featured on TV several times. But her car had gotten a flat tire along the way. She had called a repair service, but the poor accessibility of the area meant they couldn't get there until the next day, leaving her stranded. When Kevin, who used to help with our forestry work, had car trouble, it took the repair guys 3 days to show up. "You're actually lucky." Her eyes widened in surprise. It was understandable. She was clearly from the city, and I had felt the same way about the countryside when I left. Even if her attitude showed a bit of disdain for the rural life, I couldn't blame her. It didn't seem like she meant any harm anyway.
If the repair service is coming tomorrow, I could just spend the night in my car.
She said to me. This area has bears and wild boars. As soon as I said this, her expression turned dark. It seemed she wasn't good at hiding her emotions.
In that case, I'll find a nearby hotel.
There aren't any hotels around here.
Then maybe I could take a bus or taxi back to town.
The last bus already left, and a taxi ride to town would be very expensive, assuming you could even get one to come out here. With each response, her options dwindled, and her expression grew more troubled. She really is quite expressive. As the night wore on and the lights from the town began to fade, I made her an offer. If you'd like, you can stay at my house. On the drive to my parents' home, I asked for her name and occupation. She introduced herself as Sarah and said she worked for a consulting company in New York specializing in hotel management. Her purpose here was to ask the manager of the restaurant to supervise a menu for one of their hotels. When we arrived and I saw her in proper lighting, I realized she was quite beautiful. However, she looked pale and gave off the impression of being more gaunt than simply slim. She reminds me of myself 7 years ago. I couldn't help but think that Sarah might be struggling with the demands of her work. My parents warmly welcomed her into our home and treated her as a guest. The warmth of the people around here might be something unique to rural life. For the locals who have lived here their whole lives, it's probably so natural that they don't even think about it. But to me, having returned from New York, it feels truly special.
Oh my, you're a real beauty, but you're so thin. Are you eating properly?
Such directness was also a hallmark of rural life. Concerned about her skinniness, my parents served her a feast made with fresh vegetables from our farm. At first, Sarah seemed taken aback by how quickly my parents closed the distance between them. But she was so impressed by the food that she polished off every bite. After she had calmed down, I showed her to the guest room and encouraged her to rest. Whether it was because the tension of dealing with the unexpected trouble had lifted, or because Shed had a rare chance to escape her usual demanding schedule, Sarah fell asleep almost immediately. The next morning, she looked noticeably healthier. However, the repair service didn't arrive at the scheduled time. As I had feared, there had been some kind of mix-up, and they couldn't come right away. To make matters worse, the restaurant she was supposed to visit was closed, and she wouldn't be able to meet the chef until 3 days later. As a result, Sarah ended up staying at our house for nearly a week. Initially, she was hesitant about imposing, but my parents insisted, saying things like, "One extra person doesn't add much to the chores. Food tastes better when shared. And we were planning to tidy up the house anyway, so your help would be welcome." Though a bit bewildered at first, she didn't seem entirely unhappy about staying. During her time with us, Sarah used the guest room and helped with tasks like tidying the house and working in the fields. My parents grew very fond of her, and the three of them became quite close. I came to appreciate how much my parents' warmth, which I had once dismissed as typical of country people, was actually a valuable quality. Their personalities, which had undoubtedly shaped my overly serious nature, were something I used to resent. But over the past 7 years, I had learned so much from them. Thanks to my parents, Sarah seemed healthier and more relaxed by the end of her stay. After about a week, her car was repaired, and her business with the restaurant was complete. The day before she was set to return to New York, Sarah thanked me.
Thank you so much for everything. You've been a huge help.
Though she said this, it seemed like there was more she wanted to say. So I asked her, "Is there something else on your mind?" She looked surprised, apparently unaware of how much her thoughts showed on her face. She explained that the relentless pressure and workload in New York had nearly pushed her to her limit. She admitted that the unexpected trouble and the week she spent here had been a saving grace for her. She was just like me 7 years ago. Hearing her story, I deeply understood how she felt, having experienced something similar myself in New York. You've done well to keep going, but don't push yourself too hard. When I shared my personal experiences and offered those words to her, she broke down in tears, crying uncontrollably. Through her sobs, she repeatedly whispered her gratitude, then returned to New York. For a while after Sarah left, I couldn't fully focus on my farm work. Every time I passed the spot where her car had gotten a flat tire, I felt as if there was a huge hole in my heart. It was then that I finally realized I had fallen for Sarah. But it was already too late. Unfortunately, I figured I would never see her again. Around that time, I received a letter from a high school friend about a class reunion being held in New York. It had been 17 years since I graduated from high school. It always avoided such gatherings, coming up with various excuses to skip them. However, with a classmate who lived nearby telling me to show up for once, and my parents pestering me to go find yourself a future wife, I reluctantly decided to attend. On the day of the reunion, the event was filled with classmates who had graduated from our prestigious high school and gone on to become high-ranking officials or executives at major companies. I couldn't bring myself to join their conversations. By now, most had been working for about a decade and had climbed the career ladder. As they talked about their careers and homes, I mentioned my life growing vegetables and working in forestry in the mountains. This prompted chuckles and turned me into the butt of their jokes.
Ethan joined a pharmaceutical company. Oh, wait. No, you quit, didn't you?
And now he's a farmer. Talk about a glamorous career change.
Must be nice to live a life without any real pressure.
One particularly drunk classmate went as far as to mock me outright.
I bet you're still single, aren't you? A dropout like you wouldn't even have a girlfriend, let alone a wife.
While his words were rude, I couldn't entirely deny their accuracy. Feeling humiliated, I decided to leave the venue. But then, out of nowhere,
Sorry to keep you waiting. Let's go. Oh, you must be Ethan's classmates. I am Ethan's girlfriend.
a woman suddenly linked her arm with mine and turned to the others. The group froze in shock, clearly dumbfounded. But no one was more stunned than me. I glanced at her face, and it was Sarah.
What? Ethan's girlfriend?
That guy living the country life?
Was someone that beautiful? How did that happen?
Ignoring the shocked reactions of my classmates, Sarah took my hand and led me outside.
Sorry for the sudden interruption.
She said apologetically, though her expression seemed happy. Why are you here? I knew it was a silly question, but I couldn't help myself. After all, I had resigned myself to never seeing her again, and here she was. As it turns out, Sarah was actually a consultant for this hotel where the reunion was held, and she visited here today on her inspection. Sorry you said such awful things. I apologized, but Sarah shook her head and replied,
I'll never forget what you said to me that day. You've done well. After I went back to New York, the story you shared about your experience and how your life changed in the countryside stayed with me. The strange pressure I used to feel began to fade. That 1 week completely changed my life.
she continued, and then admitted that she had been thinking about me ever since. I confessed that I also could not stop thinking about her since she left. And so, our long-distance relationship began. On her days off, Sarah would always come to stay at my house.
When we get married, I'd love to settle down here and live a quiet, peaceful life.
It was clear from her expression that she truly meant it.
I can't wait for you and Sarah to start living together.
Having fully sided with Sarah, they joined forces to pressure me in a way far more intense than any manager ever had. Yet it was pressure I was grateful for. The country life I had once despised during my student days had now completely transformed my life. Perhaps I was never suited for a career involving constant competition with others, resorting to underhanded tactics to boost sales and achieve success. All I had ever been capable of was facing the task in front of me with sincerity and persistence. I intend to face Sarah's feelings with the same sincerity. And soon, I plan to tell her something that will bring this to fruition. Probably the most straightforward words I've ever spoken. Will she accept them?